I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the School Building Project Committee. I'm just launching right into the agenda. The chair's report, we had a membership update. We have 2 new members to join our committee. We're very excited. Kate Scales and Brian Baer. And if you guys don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot and have you give just a little intro about yourselves and what you do.
So my name is Kate Scales. I'm a Hamlin parent, currently a kindergartner as well as a preschooler at the integrated. I'm also a Hamlin graduate, 1984. And I was a teacher for 12 years, a 5th grade teacher in Quincy. But now I'm a teacher of my 2 little ones.
Great, thanks.
I'm Brian Baer. I currently have 3 kids in the Westwood schools, 2 at the middle school and 1 at the high school. And they have graduated from the Martha Jones community, which I remember very fondly. I'm an architect. I have my own practice here in town. I've done a lot of work in town. I helped First Parish up the street do their big building project there. And I'm very excited to be a part of this.
Thank you. Well, we welcome you both. We're thrilled you guys are able to join. In terms of project updates, I think, so the evaluation criteria subcommittee, which was appointed at our last meeting, has met a couple times. And what we're really doing is trying to form the criteria for how we're going to be evaluating these options. And I'm actually going to turn this over to Tim. Is this when you were planning to show us the matrix or?
Well, I think it's going to come up in the presentation.
Oh, in the presentation.
If you want to sort of table that.
Okay. All right. So we're just going to move right into the exciting part of the day. So this is Doran Whittier, Rob, and Don are here to present options to us for what this building could potentially look like. So turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Maya. So we've done a fair amount of work, working fast and furiously, putting together a series of options to address each of the different scenarios that we've been tasked to look at. And what we've tried to do with this presentation is try to organize it in a way so that it's a little bit more user-friendly. So we added some color. So when you look at these, you'll see a little box in the upper right-hand corner of each of the options, and they relate to each of these different scenarios. So the blue is for Hamlin only, 315 students. Green is for Hamlin and Deerfield, 560 students. And then the yellow is a Hamlin and Chien for 685 students. So that'll help you kind of guide through this process because we actually developed a number of different building layouts for the same option. So like, for example, in the Hamlin Deerfield new, there's a series of multiple iterations of different configurations of the building for that particular option. So we'll get into that in a minute. One of the things we'd like to note is that each of these comes with a different space summary. So for the 315 students, we're looking at a 90,860 gross square footage for the building, which is based off of MSBA standards and also the feedback that we received from the working group and the school district. So down below, you'll see at the bottom that kind of summarizes some of the differences. So in the 315 students, there's 3 sections per grade level. The WABA lower and upper programs are the special education programs, and that might differ from one scenario to another, trying to maximize the best opportunities for those programs. Focus program, language-based program. In the Hamlin only, there's 1 art room versus Hamlin and Deerfield, and in the Hamlin and Chien have 2 art rooms. 1 music room in the Hamlin only, 1 in the Hamlin Deerfield, and then 2 music rooms in the Hamlin Chien scenario. And then the same size, we've just used a 12,000 square foot gymnasium as a placeholder. And we know that there's been some ongoing discussions on kind of fine-tuning what the needs are for the town in that regard. We've got a slide, we can talk about that as well towards the end. So our first, so this is the overall list of the options that we're looking at. So there's 15 to go through. So the very first one is a base repair. We call it CIP, which means Capital Improvement Plan. And basically what that is the site and building assessment that we've gone through with our engineers. We've identified specific items that we observed in each of the buildings, provided recommendations for those, and then extracted those from the report and put them into a spreadsheet of action items to be done at each of the buildings. And that we're using as a sort of a baseline infrastructure upgrade, repair option. So that's kind of like this sort of baseline review. There's really nothing educationally that's being done to the building under that option. It's just a base option as a starting point. The next one is the add Renault for Hamlin only. As you'll notice, we also indicated we've got an informal name because there are a number of these in different configurations. It helps us and it might help you to identify a certain option. So as you go through these, you might be able to recognize them with the informal name. So I'll continue right through these. So there's 3 with the Hamlin only. There's 5 for the Hamlin and Deerfield. And so these are organized, the base repair first. We've got a series of the addition renovation options. Then we have the new Hamlin only. And then the rest of them are all new. And then they go from Hamlin Deerfield to Hamlin Chien. So that's the kind of the order. And then under the Hamlin Chien, there's 2 Hamlin Chien options, one out for the addition renovation, one at the Hamlin site, one at the Chien site, and then 5 new options for that scenario, 2 at the Hamlin site and 3 at the Chien. One that just surfaced yesterday, and we managed to actually put together an option, so we've got we can show it here today as well.
Thank you.
So walking through the first one, so this is the base repair. The building basically would stay as it is, aside from infrastructure improvements. So that would be HVAC system upgrades, roofing replacement, windows, doors, any of the sort of the guts of the building that would be replaced, but really nothing, no changes educationally.
Rob, can
Yep.
that
Yep.
configuration without a renovation fit 315 kids?
No, I'm sorry. You're right. This would not fit the 315 students, and that is something that we would highlight in our narrative to the MSBA, is that this capital improvement plan is just infrastructure items only. It doesn't meet the needs of the school district for the enrollment, and that's there's a renovation option that we are also just going to speak to narratively, and just in our report to MSBA is that look, it really doesn't make sense for us to try and find ways to reconfigure anything in the building because we're still not meeting the enrollment needs.
Okay.
And what's really important about the diagram up here too are the colors. So the red is showing all the spaces that are undersized as it relates to MSBA standards. Yellow is right-sized, and if anything was green, it was oversized. So you can see the school is really lacking space, even for its current capacity.
And while we're not showing this today, because we want to focus on the options, we do have one of these for each of the 3 schools as well. One of these space summary graphic imagery.
Is the current area was it on that slide? The current area of that building, of the Hamlin building, gross square footage?
No, I don't believe it's on that slide.
I think we have it, isn't it?
Just for comparison to options.
I think it's around 33 or
yeah.
35,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm. So walking through, so this is the addition reno for the Hamlin, only 315 students. So as we go through these, this is our first blush approach to locating these on the site. It's really more of like a site test fit. How does that diagram or how does that concept fit on the site with an approximate area for bus or parent drop off and so forth? How would that work? That's not to say there's other options. There's certainly other options for each one of these that we could revise and continue to modify as we went through. But it's really just kind of giving a first stab at the test fit of the building. So in this option here, you can see there isn't very much of the existing building I'm sorry. So the existing building is about approximately right here, and we'll be reusing that section. This is a gym addition, and then a classroom or academic wing that's being added onto the end here. Here's your bus loop and a parent drop-off. Alternatively, you could have parking here and for parents, and they can walk over to the building. It's a difficult configuration to allow for both of those, the parent and the bus drop-off, to really work ideally well. But it was important to have a separate bus loop. We've got, we're keeping the field here, and we're just indicating an approximate area for the fields. Since our last meeting with you guys, we also had a go-to-meeting conference with a number of people in town that represent the soccer and lacrosse and baseball, and we got some feedback from them. We haven't integrated any of that into these options yet because it was just a couple days ago.
Yeah, and just as a high level, the discussions for the gym, we had a call with Westwood Basketball Association, Westwood Rec Department, Ken and Matt Gillis from the Westwood High. And around the gym, what we're hearing is that they'd like an 84-foot court with 2 middle school cross courts and some form of bleachers. And we've asked the architects to let us know what's the size of the gym, if we have permanent 4 rows, if we have 2 rows permanent and 2 rows that can be pushed in and out, or if all 4 rows you can push in. And we'll see the difference in size, but that's sort of the minimum requirements for the gym. In terms of the fields, it was a little bit more complicated because there may be a couple of Westwood town projects coming online, like the first behind the First Parish, and then there's also the proposal for the Thurston Lights, and those could go a long way for the fields. But I think what we're hearing, it's a little unclear. I think what we need is an 11v11 soccer field, a little league baseball diamond, and preferably have those not overlap. And I think if we can get those 2 things on the field, then that will again go a long way to alleviating some of the field pressure. So, and that was a call with Westwood Little League, the Westwood Lacrosse, Westwood Soccer, Youth Soccer, and again the rec department and the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So we're making progress on the field issues.
Yeah. And as we go through these, if you, Emma, or Emily, or anyone else that was in part of the subcommittee have comments as we go through, welcome to chime in at any time.
Rob, maybe you can just give the color coding overview of how those different boxes are color coded.
Yeah, so the blue is the Hamlin only.
No, I think he means on the plan, like the
Oh, sure, yeah. Let me pull up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You understand.
Yeah, so the dark blue signifies classroom space or teaching space. The the red is for art and music. This green is cafeteria and kitchen. The orange is phys ed, so the gym. Yellow is a library or a media center, as we're noting it on here. Pink are special education or student support type spaces. And this sort of teal, blue, green is the admin.
And then just one quick note, you'll note that the kindergarten classrooms are bigger than the rest of the classrooms, and that's mandated by the MSBA and guidelines. Kindergartners need bigger classrooms, and they also each contain their own toilet within them.
Much space, how many square feet are you, what are you adding?
This looks like it's about 90,000, I think you said.
Right, this is about, yeah, so this is a total of approximately 90,000 square feet.
Total, or is that what they're
No,
adding?
No,
That's
so
total,
it's-
because your
it's
guess at
total.
the last
Yeah.
one was
So what are
37,
you
so
adding?
How many?
Yeah.
What's,
Sounds
what's
like
90
I-
minus
57.
35?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't have the square footages indicated on each of these slides, but we can provide that to you. We have it on another spreadsheet. So in terms of the configuration, you would enter here. This is the admin entrance area here. This academic wing on the first floor, academic wing on the second floor. Each of the classrooms surround an extended learning area, and the media center in this particular option is sort of split. So you'd have one part of it that might be central to the building, and then another part of it out here towards the end. And each of these options kind of plays around with different configurations of locating the library, just to open up the discussion and explore the different ways of providing the library or media center services. We also have another component of it here on the second floor as well. So in this particular option, that component is spread out through the building.
Just one, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
So you'll note on here, the classrooms in the new wing all have that extended learning experience, but the classrooms, the kindergarten classrooms and also the classrooms on the first floor that are within the existing building will not have that extended learning experience. So one of the flaws that we've discussed with this plan is that there's a difference in experience for the students depending on which classroom you're located in. So clearly that's not ideal for the plan. It's one of the negatives we see with this plan. Yep.
Also, on that note, I assume that there'd be some reconfiguration within the existing building and some upgrades and finishes and such, but is it your thought that there would be a distinguishable difference between the existing, even renovated, and the new space because of both spatial, but also what your limitations are?
The idea is that we would attempt to make it seamless between the new and in the existing. So it's a major renovation in all these cases. In fact, the kindergarten spaces that you see at the bottom of the screen, those are many classrooms that have been made a few. So the walls have been removed to allow that to occur.
Right, and the gym, for example, the existing gym is now the cafeteria in this option, and there's a significant amount of work here that we may end up doing something with the floor level, in terms of ripping out the slab to make all of this work because there's different levels in there.
So with your experience with other buildings like this, though, the intent would be seamless, but because of there's limitations of the existing building, do you think you're able to achieve that really, that seamless flow between existing and new, or will there be some, because of the limitations of the building,
I think what you find, we'll upgrade all the finishes, we'll right size the rooms as best we can. They won't necessarily be the exact size of what it might be required in terms of a square footage program, but overall, you'll know what was existing and what was new, but it'll be like new.
Yeah, and when you look at the extent of the renovations in this particular option, for example, during demolition, it might be difficult to recognize, the inside of the building as what it is today, because it's so intensive. The changes are so intensive here, changing the entrance, entirely, for example.
And another thing to think about with the Renault option is that kids will be, they'll be building around the kids while they're in session. You'll have literally next door in the wall, you'll hear the construction will be going on. So it's going to be this option, any of the add Renault options will be more disruptive to students than building a new school.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that we talked about with the subcommittee, is that, while what we're doing here is building a new academic wing, that new academic wing could be constructed entirely separate from the existing building. Once you do build that, students will still need to go from there over to the gym outside the building while the existing building is renovated. And you would have to have, a temporary kitchen, a temporary cafeteria, or use the gym as the temporary cafeteria. There would be a temporary library space, temporary art and music space. There would be portable trailers that would be associated with this, and the dealing with construction on site.
One thing that just having been through some of these kinds of projects, while the finishes are like, it's seamless in the sense of finishes, that things like elongated rooms, you can't, that because of drywall, you can't do much with, but ceiling heights, if you can't get the equipment in the same ceiling heights as the new, the HVAC system. So those kinds of things that you're limited by the geography of the building.
So the next option is really along the same lines. It's just adding the square footage for the 560 students. Here we've got a bus drop-off area, a parent drop-off area, and parking here. There is, just due to the fact of where the building is located on site, and where we're trying to fit in parking, it makes some of this, pretty far from the entrance. So that's also something to consider. And so this is very similar. So we're adding on another cluster of classrooms onto the end here, and another floor level here, again with the extended learning space. And as we go through these options, we'll be talking about this a little bit more. So you'll see some of these options have these sort of small learning community groupings. This one, it's a linear layout, so students would go through one space in order to get to the next, and so these two learning communities could work together, and the working group talked about the kind of pluses and minuses of each of these. I think the general consensus was that that this linear concept of grouping of these small learning communities is not as ideal as some of the other concepts where it's not so linear. Moving on to the 685 for Hamlin and Chien at the Hamlin Site. So this one's called the Claw. So we've got two academic wings with a sort of a centralized public spaces over here. We've relocated the admin into the existing classroom wing over here. Kitchen and cafeteria extend out in this area. Again, that gym addition, library, academic wings out this way, out towards the wooded area, bus and parking.
Can I go back to that one from so where the parking goes into the woods, why aren't we, at least in the concept, showing that we'd have to go into the woods to at least capture a soccer field?
Yeah, it's a good item. We should be showing a soccer field at least on this to be consistent with the other options.
I mean, it's expensive because it involves an awful lot of work to create it into the woods, but
Right. Yeah.
if you can do the parking.
Yeah, that's more a result of the fast moving that we're
Okay.
doing here. So
Okay.
absolutely,
Yeah.
we'll capture that.
So looking into a little bit closer at the floor plan, so in dashed here, you can see these are portions of the existing building that would be removed. And so we're renovating this section of the building. Again, so the cafeteria gets to be much larger, again, dealing with existing ceiling heights and changes that would reflect in this scenario. So we would have a higher space here and maybe a lower space over here. Music is down at this end, close to the cafeteria. Art is and media center down here. Again, this option explores these longer wings with two small learning communities kind of joined together. We've also incorporated a little bit of the library space within the extended learning area. Exploring the idea of potentially having kind of these smaller satellite areas where books might be available for students, as they're going about their day. And then looking at the second floor, it's just a portion of those academic wings that would go up to the second floor. So on this level, there's two of these small learning communities. So then this looks at the 685 students at Renault, Hamlin, and Chien at the Chien Site. So we've used the same sort of idea where we've got these two academic wings. So we're reusing the existing gym to be admin space. We're keeping the kitchen and cafeteria where it's at, probably expanding that a bit. And then we've got the music spaces over here and art over here, and then the media center in the middle. Looking at the site plan, we've got our bus drop-off with some parking on the other side of that, and then a parent drop-off loop and additional parking, and then a field closest to the pond. And there would be a little bit of some play area on the back. One of the issues with this is, we've got now a two-story wing that's somewhat close to the residences on this side. So it's just something that we're aware of.
And on this plan, can you, I guess you're here. So one of the things we're seeing in each of these is, and I think we may have touched on this with this group, is the idea that we're trying to separate the school into public and private spaces. So you'll notice that the entrance is with the cafeteria, the gym. So if we were to have sports after school or on the weekends or at night or an event, you could close off the academic wings and just access the public spaces of the school. The other thing to think about with this design on the Chien site is that this is two-level, right? They're both. It's a huge building on that site, and as Rob pointed out, you're very close to the neighbors to the north. You're very close to the neighbors to the west. This would look like a big urban school, I would think. Do you think that's fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing especially with all the parking that's required for a school that size. So that's just one thing to think about.
Yeah, and the fields that are there, we would need to locate someplace else and find another area to have those fields.
Do we have an estimate of how many buses would line up in this queue? I know for Hamlin right now there's one bus because so many families walk or drop off.
Yeah, we're showing 11 in this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So looking a little bit closer at the floor plan, so this in black is the portion of the building that we would be holding on to. We would demolish the oldest section of the building over here. We found, after our analysis, that building would be extremely difficult to deal with, particularly with the handicap accessibility issues. You need to go up a set of stairs, a half a level, just to get to the main floor, in addition to the waffle slab construction and load-bearing walls and and the age of the building in terms of the energy efficiency. There was just a multiple different reasons for removing that portion of the building. So we entered the building here. Again, the cafeteria remains, admin, gym. This is that sort of public area, and then the academic wings on each end. And then on the second floor, it would just be these two academic wings that would be on the second floor level. Going back to the Hamlin site, now we're looking at new options. So those are all of the Ad Renault concepts that we looked at. So now moving forward through the series, these are just new school concepts. So this goes to the new Hamlin at 315 students. And here again, so this concept explores this sort of linear academic wing. You have an entrance here, your separation of your private and public zone. So this is the core of the building, cafeteria space, gym, administration area. Here we have your bus loop and parent drop-off, parking, and then the fields are closest to Gay Street. And what we've tried to do in each of these new concepts is to design it in a way so that the building can be entirely constructed without impacting ongoing school activities. So I think this is pretty self-explanatory. It's what I just kind of went over. So we've got your central sort of cafeteria space. This could be closed off or open as you come in, and it's a place where you could have students gather in the mornings before going into each of their classrooms. There's a stage here that we're indicating. There was some discussion about whether the stage should be off of the cafeteria or the gym. This particular option explores the idea of having one that straddles both, so you have the option of opening it up to the gym and the cafeteria, or one or the other.
But moving forward, the preference has sort of evolved, and the
Yeah.
cafeteria association is more preferred.
So this is what we call the butterfly concept. So this is a Hamlin Deerfield for 560 students at the Hamlin site. And so this explores the smaller learning communities being as individual sort of houses with a main street here where they feed off of. So you come in at this side, administration, gym, cafeteria, stage here, and so this also one thing we try to think about is on the Hamlin site in particular, wanting to put the academic wings closer to the woods so that they have a clear opportunity to maximize the access to the woods and learning opportunities out in that way. So here we've got a bus loop, parking, leaving the majority of this front area here to fields. So you can say this is a large green space. Of course, the further we put the building into the woods, comes higher kind of development costs, because now we're developing more land out the further we get. So taking a closer look inside, so here we've got a stage on this side that opens up onto the cafeteria. This again can be open on this side if desired, or maybe even a folding type door that can be open or closed. The special education in each of these options, we're trying to integrate small group rooms that are paired with classrooms. Some of the things that we heard from our meetings with the principals and staff, and then sprinkling these student support type spaces throughout the building.
So Robin, this one, if I'm reading right, the media piece / library would be 2 stories. There'd be with stairs going up or something.
Yes, yep. So the media center in this particular option, the idea here is that it sort of becomes like an integral part of the experience as you're walking through the space to get to where you're going. Here's some additional media center components. So that each of the students, wherever they're going, get to experience that sort of media center. And these, this could be enclosed with glass. It could be open to the extended learning spaces. It could be a mix of both. However, but the idea is that it's a central piece that people would walk through or see or pass by as they go about their day.
So what would you use the extended media piece for?
The extended learning areas.
No, the media, the small one you have down to the right. Yeah, what's that for?
Yeah. So this would be kind of like a satellite area where you may have books that are particular to let's say kindergarten or early childhood. So this would be this could be kindergarten on this first floor. This could be first grade on the second floor. So these may end up being books that are specific to that age group.
I think one thing that I had to clarify is that it on the diagram, it looks like because it's a box that it's going to be an actual space, but really what it's representing is that we're saying the square footage allowance for the media center is a particular thing, and we've just decided to take some of that space and sort of reallocate it to a different part of the building to make the extended learning space bigger. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think all it really means is that we're incorporating some of that square footage into the extended learning area.
Yeah, and we saw this in play in the Millis school that we toured, where they actually didn't have a central media center at all. It was dispersed on all of the floors, and this is more of a little bit, not quite as extreme as that example. In some ways, we really like that because everywhere you look, there were books, and kids could check out books right outside their classroom. But at the same time, it's also nice for kids to have a destination to go to and where the instructor the librarian can do direct instruction. So I think the preference here is a little bit, more like a traditional destination, but thinking about maybe putting some of the collection out, for kids to be able to access.
What's been we've had a lot of good library discussion. Fair to say.
A lot of library discussion.
And we had the centralized version, right? You have a singular destination. Then we had the distributed throughout, put it in all the extended learning places and don't have a library with its, its own identity. And now we've come back to what's this hybrid that you're describing, Maya, which we think is very exciting because you still have this destination place where you can bring classes, you can have library instruction. But the idea of distributing some of that into the extended learning spaces brings age-appropriate material out into those learning centers. So we're excited about where the direction's going right now.
Yeah, especially in this model where, the two sort of neighborhoods at the top of the design, you have to walk through the media center, at least pass it to get to it, whereas the ones on the right, you don't. So it's nice that they have, they can experience the library on an everyday basis as in addition to the other, just like the other kids.
Yep. I just have a question, maybe you're gonna come to it in a few minutes, and that reading the critique of what we have with our problems right now, and I'm kind of interested in this intensive science experiments, the concept of doing that, and at the moment our big problem is space limitations. We're doing this in hallways, the gym, the cafeteria. We're dismantling things, rebuilding them between the experiments. So it's and then the storage so there's an awful lot of problems. There's no sinks. So teaching science in this kind of a building, what's different from, the method we now have, which is picking up and hallways. Is there gonna be an area where this work is done, where storage can be done, where the experiments can be set up and not moved? Is that a new thing for elementary schools?
Yeah, there won't be a science room to go to, but we're providing opportunities throughout the building for that to occur. essentially all the classrooms will have sinks available to them, so you could have work occur within the classrooms. The extended learning spaces that you see also, typically what we do is, and we haven't gotten to that level of detail, but we'll look at providing opportunities for wet spaces and maker spaces within within those areas also. And then storage is always a challenge for all kinds of activities within the building. So there will be storage provided for student projects. Quite frankly, we like to see it be shelves. So even as projects are being constructed, they can be put up and out of the way, but still on display. So you can always see what's happening within the building. So, so I think there's going to be a variety of opportunities for those
So
experiments to
the
occur.
future teaching science in elementary schools is gonna be on this approach with doing it in the individual classrooms.
Yes, yeah, at the elementary level.
And having that sort of extended learning space offers opportunities for, let's say, up two teachers to collaborate on a project together, on a science project together.
Right.
And so, like Dawn was saying, there may be a portion of that extended learning space that's dedicated as a wet or project space where we maybe put a hard surface flooring in, and there's a sinks and counters there, and easy access to materials, so that if two teachers want to get together with both of their classrooms and work on a project, they could go out and do that.
Just one more thing to note on this, and I know Rob mentioned this, but the last plan we saw was a linear plan that had a sort of a long hallway and multiple grade levels within that one long hallway. This is much more of a neighborhood plan where each wing, if you will, is one grade. So, and I can't read which one's the kindergarten, but so on the first floor, the one at the right, that's the kindergartners are there, and then maybe this is first and second also on that first floor, and then on the second, however you want to configure it. But as opposed to sort of walking by other grades, you sort of have your own neighborhood, which again is trying to make it feel like a smaller school.
And that's the kind of the nice thing about this layout. I mean, aside from the kindergarten, which have the larger classrooms, the other wings could be, you could flip it around and reconfigure the different grades to be in different of those wings, however you'd like it.
I would just add that when we had principals reviewing, taking sort of a first look at the plan, I think there was a lot of, I think the group really coalesced around this idea of the neighborhoods. It's sort of one of the very important things we've been hearing from educators and from parents, this idea of keeping the small school feel. And the group felt like this was achieving that.
Rob, can you just put the cursor on where would the, if you have a nighttime event, where is the set of doors that will be required?
So each of these wings would be locked off so that nobody would have access to any of those wings. So primarily you would have, this corridor extending out here. This may also end up having a block off here so that it's just, this area as well. There could be an exit out here.
So right by the front door too.
You could.
Yeah, you could potentially close it off here as well. Yep.
Right, so there's a lot of opportunities for, depending on how much of the building you want to have open.
If you want the music room open or
Right.
not. So this looks at the Hamlin Deerfield 560, again, going back to the kind of the linear approach. This is the tugboat. So here, this explores the idea of having almost like an early childhood center wing. So the kindergarten and potentially first grade on the second floor would be located in this area. This would be the core classroom area, or the core of the building with the gym and the cafeteria and the kitchen, and then the other academic wing down this side. Bus loop, parent drop-off, and parking, and then again, trying to keep the fields down closest to the road. So this also makes it somewhat difficult in terms of access for students. You know, they would need to come around and go down to the fields here. Of course, we'd have other fields, you know, directly out, or play areas directly out beyond here. But in terms of access to the fields, it's a little bit more challenging. So taking a closer look at this, so the again, the admin entrance here, cafeteria, gym, that academic wing, and then and so the idea here is that these small learning communities, they could access the gym, they could access the music and the cafeteria. They don't really need to you know, be involved with the rest of the building. And I think, generally speaking, that was kind of viewed as not ideal, right? In terms of creating a separate, because it felt a little bit isolating.
Yeah, I'd say I initially liked it, but the early childhood concept, but I think principals clearly were overriding that thinking. Yeah, is that fair to say, Sarah, that the principals didn't like the idea of having the little kids separated from
I'd
the
agree
kids?
with that. I think
Yeah.
there's some value of mixing age groups, and I think the little kids learn things from the older kids learn things by working with the little kids. And I know across the elementary schools, many of us have a culture of using buddy classrooms where, fourth graders are paired with second graders once a month, and it's a really valuable experience that would be harder to do with.
They persuaded me.
A
Good
The
argument.
thing about that linear model is it's a long walk from end
Yeah,
to
that's
end.
true.
So in terms of talking about these numbers, like doubling the size of the schools, I think there is something to be said for the smaller neighborhood feel.
That was an interesting moment in our discussion when I think Chien actually tried to relate the distance of the hallway to something that we knew, so that because it's hard for us to imagine those distances, and it was a longer hall than I had imagined just looking at the diagram here.
Right, and I'm not sure that the detractor is so much the amount of steps that a child would have to walk. I think it's in terms of maximizing instructional time to get from, math to PE. You don't want to lose so much time in transitions.
And then I think also in the prior design, the art room is integrated with the older grades. And so when the kindergartners and first graders go to art, they're not only is it a long sort of travel path, but they're also walking through the extended learning area of the other grades, which can be disruptive on a whole host of levels.
Mm-hmm. So this goes back to the claw with the 560. Here we have a bus loop and parent drop-off. Here we're trying to, keep the site circulation off to the edges and have the play area in the middle with easier access from the core spaces. So the gym and students exiting out the building to go and play, can have easy access down to that field down below. Meanwhile, there could be easy access to the wooded area out of the academic wings. But again, the length here, as was mentioned, was a concern especially once we get into the larger enrollments.
I've got a question, and it's probably more geared to Sarah, is, Ron, you mentioned a few times access from the school to the fields. Other than playground space, do the kids use the fields a lot?
Yeah, so
Actual field?
during any day that's warm enough and dry enough to have physical education outside, I would say most of the PE teachers do plan to teach PE outside and do so regularly.
Okay.
So yeah, it's both for recess and for instruction.
Okay. And I think, thinking about it till you went through this, one of the things we may want to mention along the way is in some of these options, it's a much larger school, so we probably need more playground space. So I don't know if that's outlined, someplace, I'm sure.
Yeah,
it is,
we
but-
actually we tried to dive into that early.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't been worked out yet.
Yeah,
So
that's
we
okay, yeah.
know that there are going to be opportunities around the building for playground space, for outdoor education, for getting out into the woods with trails and, doing some exploratory activities. So that will be coming also.
Yeah, we've
It looks
been-
like on any of these options, there's space for bigger playground
Yes.
areas, but at some point, we probably just need to say, and this is where the kids go play.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen in practice, and we've also been talking about, a kindergarten playground or a K1 playground, and then an older playground for the other kids. So we're definitely, we haven't quite gotten to the outside yet, but we're definitely looking at a lot of play. And then the outdoor classroom, that's really an important goal that a lot of us have talked about. And Sunita Williams and Needham had a wonderful example of that, where they had a trail that led to the outdoor classroom, and you could see it tucked up in the woods, and there was a whiteboard out there, and that just seemed like a really neat way to handle it. And I mean, if we could do something like that, that would be great. But, yeah.
A lot of the outside area depends on taking out the old building. So the amount of time to demolish it, prepare, is it like a year? So for the first year opening the school, we would need to then, so what's the timetable for, is it a year, 2 years before you have that extra space from the demolition of the whole building?
Yeah, the demolition of the building won't take all that long. It could be, 3 to 5 months for the abatement and demolition, but then you have to prepare the site. Probably what takes the longest time is the growing of the fields. If it's natural grass, you want a couple seasons for that to grow and take place. We haven't talked about artificial surfaces. So it certainly wouldn't be 2 years, but it could be 8 months to a year before you're really out in there.
The other thing to notice about this particular plan is you see how close to the existing building the new building is. So that, if you're thinking about construction, that will be a little bit more challenging than a plan where the new building is further set back. But here, I mean, they're very close on the site.
Yeah, and obviously this plan we can shift back a little bit. We were just trying to show some different ways of looking at it and pluses and minuses. So this is pretty straightforward. It's a similar concept to what we've shown. One of the main differences in this one here is that the cafeteria becomes this sort of longer experience. And so we were exploring the idea of having the cafeteria be more as like a food court type thing, where people can walk by and have it be kind of an integral part of the day. Generally speaking, I think the group was not a huge fan of this idea and wanted to have it be a little bit more contained, with the potential to open up a side of the cafeteria to that experience, but not have it be a fully open idea as a circulation area.
Right, and make it an assembly space that has a stage adjacent to it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you back up one?
Yep.
Up to one thing we haven't really mentioned is the fact north is up on all these slides. So we're working to orient the building so the classrooms are facing north or south. That's the optimal light to get into a classroom. So we haven't touched on it, but you'll see in most cases we're doing a pretty good job of that. And when you go back to the plans, reason I raised that is this, you only have a 2-story portion on one of the legs. So that's the southern leg. This has got rotated around from the site plan.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have a 1-story piece in front, which will allow light to get down into the classroom space between the 2 wings.
The other thing about the cafeteria is we actually saw that in practice again when we went to Stoughton, and that was a high school. And we actually loved it in Stoughton because it felt like you were at an airport, where you're walking through the corridor, and on the right there's just a bunch of tables and people hanging out. It felt much more like a hangout space, but we thought that was very appropriate for a high school, but for an elementary school it might not be quite as functional. So that's why initially, we were talking about this sort of open dining experience, and then started thinking about who would be sitting in there, and we had some teachers, cafeteria monitors weigh in, and we really dialed that back and said, okay, let's go back to the more
It's out at the
Containment.
Gates, yeah, it was out at the Gates Middle School too, and I have to say I
Right.
really liked it in Situate at the Gates Middle School. But yes, I think for elementary,
It's a little tougher.
we need a little more containment.
And this is what we call the backwards E plan. And so this idea, again, has this sort of central axis of a main street or a corridor, if you will. So you enter on this side with the gym, close proximity to public and community use, close to the fields, admin space, cafeteria and kitchen and on this end, so that if you draw a line really down the middle here, you have your public area on the right and your private areas on the left. Each of these can be locked off, and any portion of this could be locked off as well. But essentially, you'd likely have this whole section of this whole side of the wing be open to the public for cafeteria, evening use. And then the bus loop over on this side, parent drop off with this green connection down to the fields here, and then the academic wings kind of opening up to the woods, so you can kind of almost visualize separate little play areas or access out to the to trails from each of these wings directly out. So you can see these extended learning spaces, and can almost imagine, I guess, doors coming straight out from that to the outside.
As you can imagine, that as the design process happens, it evolves. So this didn't all happen in a day or two. This was over a few weeks, and we think the designs start to represent more of what we've been talking about with the principals in the visioning session, with the working group, and this best displays our idea of a school in the woods, with the classrooms being out overlooking the woods, which we think would be, really special out there. The other thing that I want to point out is, in a couple of these site plans, you'll see that we've separated the bus loop from the parent drop-off, not just, on the site, but separate entrances and exits. And we'll have to discuss this further with our traffic engineers and with the town, but we think that might be a way to distribute traffic out there and try to minimize some of the impact on those neighbors that live right across the street there on Gay Street.
Well, I have a question. One of the things that people like about having, K-5 schools is that the teachers are able to interact grade to grade. Does something like this kind of foster that? Or are they all separate, so separate that they're not going to interact?
It's interesting. We're setting these up as basically grade communities right now, but there are, in the 560 model, there are 5 classrooms per grade. So what could essentially happen is they could become little 1 through 5 arrangements too. I mean, we haven't talked about that, but it gives you some flexibility looking forward, and maybe it's a mix of that happening also.
We talked about that, Jason, and it was interesting because the distance from, sort of the furthest located classroom out to what we think of as then the public space, sort of the main street,
Right.
isn't that
Right.
far. We are kind of thinking that there's, in this configuration, there's a connection between the classroom and then sort of the larger school public space that I think you could go back and forth between fairly quickly. And we were thinking of just that issue, sort of the adult culture in the building as well.
The other thing that does happen is in each one of those learning communities, there's a stair. So there's a vertical connection at the end of, if you can put the cursor on, Rob, at the end of each of those.
We'll go to the next page here.
Oh, see it there. Yeah, at the end of each of those learning communities, there's a stair connection also. So there are those opportunities to interact going up one flight.
So one question that I know we talked about, and I can't remember what the answer was. So the cafeteria on the right, we had liked the idea of that being partially open, because it was nice to have that open feel like the Sunita Williams School. But we were concerned that the class wing across from it would get too noisy during lunch. And I can't remember what we talked about.
And we haven't shown yet, but we could have opportunities to have doors there.
Okay.
it could be a glass wall with doors in it.
Most likely you will have the doors over there so that, for the after-hour isolation
Security.
Oh, right.
purpose.
Right.
So you will, there will be some form, and then how acoustically isolated, that's a completely at the discretion of the committee. And so that could be very well acoustically isolated but visually connected, and that's something, that's a detail that will be developed.
Okay.
Sarah, Emily, was there any conversation about kind of the library on 2 floors versus the library on 1 among the teachers and principals?
I think people seem to be a fan of having it on 2 floors. I mean, there's obviously a mix of opinions, but I think there's benefits of having kids on both floors being able to access the collection and the space. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Question on the cafeteria, does the MSBA correlate the size to the hours that lunch gets served? In other words, you get a bigger cafeteria, so kids aren't having lunch at 10 or 10:15.
Yes.
Is that how that's determined?
It's actually sized for the population and 2 lunches per day. So there's two seatings. So if you end up with 3 seatings, which a lot of schools do, you could have more elbow room within there, but it's sized for 2.
Yeah, and then that goes to how long is the cafeteria in use where the noise could be penetrating into the classroom wing? That helps inform that decision.
So just following up, so in this scenario, the media center library is located on the 2nd floor, and it's located directly over the admin area. But the idea was that, it's central to the building. And, of course, we can explore and continue the discussions on, does it make sense for a portion of that to be on the 1st floor? Does it make sense for the media center to be on the 1st floor, period? All of those discussions we can continue to have, but the general overall layout and idea here is that you've got this sort of central Main Street with the public and the private, and easy access for each of these to feed off of that. So this is the Chien 685 butterfly at the Hamlin. Again, this is the bus loop, parent drop-off and parking, access to the fields. This kind of tucks back a little bit further into the site. As you can see. So we've gone through this concept before, so I won't get into it too much. The main difference here is that this is for 685, so there's an extra classroom, so there's 6 classrooms per wing instead of 5.
And a second music.
And a second music room, yep. And then similarly, so this is the Hamlin Chien 685, so this is the same backwards E as you just saw, except it adds that 6 classroom and the additional music room.
Does the parking grow? It doesn't look like it.
Yes.
Yes, it
Go
does.
from 125 to 150.
Yep. So here we've added the additional music room. Then going back to the Chien site, so this is Hamlin Chien 685 at the Chien. So this is the linear classroom model. This really doesn't work. Again, these were like site test fits. As you can see, this kind of goes into this wetlands buffer area. But we wanted to show it to you to show that, we tried it out. And had the bus drop off here, the parent drop off here. This also is a long way for parents to go or kids to go from where they get dropped off to the entrance. And this is the Z concept, so it's similar to that, except it pushes this academic wing up a little bit, and what that does is allows us to slide in the building a little bit on this side to get out of that zone, and then expand the parent loop here so that it does get close to the building with the entrance on this side. Administration area here, cafeteria. Again, this two school learning community concepts in a linear fashion. The opportunities in this site are actually somewhat limited just due to the configuration of the property and the wetlands buffer, and then you've got the corner street here. So like I said, there was limited opportunities to come up with ideas for this site.
That's a really huge building and right up against the street.
It is.
It's a big building on this site. We discussed and we stayed away from going 3 stories to minimize the footprint. We know we'd be into some zoning issues if we tried to do that. Plus, it would just dwarf the residential neighborhood.
Yeah, you can see in black dashed here, this is the existing school, so you can compare that to the size of this. It's pretty significant.
And the bus queue here holds 7 buses.
Right, that's really all that we could fit.
Yeah. So that would be a problem, right? Because they're going to be more than 7 buses.
What's that?
The corner. Yeah, it could be extended. Our concern was there's a curve in the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back at the pond, so we're cautious about the sight lines.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a concept that we've talked about before. And then this is the last concept that just came up yesterday.
What are we calling this?
Gave him a lot of work yesterday.
This is like a modified butterfly. I don't know.
Got his wings clipped.
Yeah.
This kind of looks like a dragon.
So it basically what we try to do is extend the idea of having these kind of small learning communities instead of everything being linear on this site. Trying to look at well, what does it look like if we try to have these smaller learning communities, and so we've extended this learning community to be on this side. Again, it's very difficult because really this whole building would need to slide down here a bit more to get out of the wetlands area, and then that encroaches a little bit on your play area space and your parking, but that's kind of what it would look like.
Would it be, not that we may want to do it, would it be possible to have the bus come from High Street or not? I mean, up there, the bus.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. That's certainly a possibility. You mean come in this way?
Yeah, that way.
Yep. You could do that. The only downside is, now we're kind of impacting on the play area.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, we were trying to keep traffic access to High Street, direct access to High Street from the school because it is such a busy street.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I will say the exit from the car parking onto High Street is pretty close to that intersection.
Yes.
And that intersection can get really backed up.
Right.
Sure.
So that will probably be a huge problem.
Yeah, that would be a disaster.
That will not be fun.
Yeah. So we would likely. One of the things we were trying to do is to have, with this number of students, you can imagine a number of cars queuing up behind one another,
Right.
picking up and dropping off. So we were trying to create enough queuing space for that to happen. It's just problematic because if you had it here, people it would be get backed up onto the road because you might most likely parents wouldn't line up on this side towards the end on their way out. They wouldn't stop there. They would stop, here. Right?
Just one.
So.
How many buses does Chien have now? How many buses does Chien have? 5?
And Hamlin has 1, but we imagine
But if there's a consolidation.
all the walkers from Hamlin wouldn't be able to walk to
Right,
this
yeah.
other location.
More
I mean,
buses.
They like to walk, but that's kind of far.
And there's no sidewalk.
Yep.
I think you know, when evaluating these, it's extremely helpful for the site plans when you show the footprint of the existing school and then the new, and because I think people can really get a sense of that. One suggestion to consider with the floor plans too is, could we put markers on there for corridor distances that compare to what people are familiar with in the school system?
Yep.
Like the high school, for some of these larger schools, the high school has extremely long corridors, and it'd be nice to see a key on there with
Sure.
what people know. And
For
we
a
also
frame of
have some,
reference, yeah.
so for, and possibly for the Hamlin School too, what that corridor size is, so people can see the spatial difference.
So that's that. So on the evaluation criteria, you know, again, these are the scenarios that we're studying. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Do you want to discuss the options or
So what do you guys
go back
think?
and forth at all? There's a lot of information we just shared with you.
Is
I think for most
anyone,
it's brand
anyone
new.
ready to pick a design?
I wonder if it's not a good
Yes.
idea, at least to explain to the committee what the principals meeting, well, I call the principal, the educators meeting around, what their preference was around.
Oh, yeah.
layout.
Take it away.
Yeah. Well, and jump in, other folks who were there if I don't capture this correctly, but I mean, obviously there's a clear preference for a solution that is the least disruptive to education during the construction process. So that's the start. When we think about the layout and design, I think that folks are sort of immediately noticing the difficulties of the Chien site. So, you know, the principals, I think the first thing they noticed was like the bus loop, you know, they were starting to think about those kinds of logistics. When we got inside the building, I would say that the backwards E and the butterfly were the ones that we really spent the most time talking about and thinking about the way that the features of the building related to our education plan and sort of what came out of the visioning process. And that was the smaller neighborhood learning communities, the cafeteria with the performance space. We already talked about the fact that we like the idea of having a cafeteria that's more open than what we're used to now, but not going all the way to the atrium. The media center that's sort of both destination, but also a little bit distributed was important as well. I'm trying to think what other things we talked about. What else?
I don't know, the spacing for access to playgrounds and outdoor.
Oh yeah, we talked about adjacencies and the access to the outdoor space and the playgrounds quite a bit. No, we were excited when we saw those designs.
I also just wonder, comparing the sites and especially for the bigger schools on the Chien site, I know this comes later, but the traffic impact of that might be a huge impact to the community, not just the school community, but the whole community. So that seems to have a lot of weight, I think, on site selection. And also, you mentioned too, just the footprint of that, of the building program on that site and the narrowness of the site, and it's kicking off town fields and or I don't know if they're school or town fields, but it's displacing fields that would probably, for programming, have to be made up somewhere else. So I think those site issues are huge, just in comparing the scenarios, I would think. I don't know how that gets weighted with the MSBA, criteria.
Well, it gets weighed in each of these evaluation criteria. I mean, that's a good opening, I guess, to jump into this.
Sorry, can I make one more point about the Chien site? The other thing is that currently and this is getting to the fields issue, currently at the Chien site, we have 2 baseball Little League diamonds, and we have an 11 is that right?
Yeah, we do all Ks, well, we
Right.
do K first and second grade there.
In most of these solutions for Chien, we lose a lot of those fields. So we would have to, I think, Rob, you might have even mentioned it, you would have to relocate those fields somewhere else in town. And if we are consolidating at Chien, then we certainly have the Hamlin site to work with. But it was very clear on our call that at least we can't lose fields in this process, right? We hopefully will gain some, but at a minimum, we need to keep what we have. And even that is causing angst. So that's another issue with the Chien, is that any of these solutions, we would have to relocate fields and find space elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, so the difficulty is, like, for example, on the Chien site, you're building a new building on top of the existing fields. What happens during the 4 years or 3 years while construction is happening, and you still have to have students ongoing at both Chien and Hamlin.
Right, and so that one more advantage to Hamlin Site is that the only field that's really used there is the baseball diamond. So that's clearly much less disruptive than losing all of the fields that are currently the soccer fields and the two baseball diamonds that are at Chien. So these are all the things we're going to look at when we evaluate.
And that's my cue. So the evaluation subcommittee has met twice, a sort of a kickoff meeting and then a kind of a process update meeting. And kind of, what they're dealing with, if you remember on the evaluation subcommittee, is not just evaluating, but so what's the right process for this at this stage? Because we're going to be doing this twice. So this is an initial cut down to a short list, which increasingly is looking like a shorter version of a long list. But and then in June we're doing the final selection of what's the preferred option. So I think it's important, and I think it's becoming clear to that subcommittee, that with the short list, it's the question we're trying to answer is, why would you take something off the list? Whereas obviously on the preferred selection is going to be, why did you pick that? So it's a different sort of frame of mind to look at selection. So the criteria so looking at criteria and categories, that we looked at the idea of, do we go broad with a lot of categories and a lot more detail, or do we sort of look at it in a more narrow, do we go sort of narrow with a lot of detail, or do we go kind of broad, looking at categories in a more broad way? And I think, the general consensus is that, because of course we don't have a lot of detail to go really detailed, is to keep it at a more broad level and looking at it for this point of view, at least at this phase of doing the shortlist. So these criteria you see here have kind of been proposed. And thank you. And so what we're handing out here is this, what you see on the screen here, which is essentially a blank matrix that has those criteria that you saw on the left, and then across the top are the different options that you just saw. And just to clarify, the lettered number, these all have columns, are all numbered, and option 2 is not really, that one is taken off. I think that's a duplicate essentially. So the numbering along the top in terms of the NHs and ARs and all that is accurate, but the columns will change when you see the final version. But we're going to take that column 2 off. So this criteria matrix that you see, the consensus was to basically be looking at this criteria and using kind of this colored grading scale that you see at the bottom, which essentially it ends up creating, and I think I've showed this committee, this is an example of what was done on another school project in terms of how that criteria ends up looking when it's completed. So it's kind of a very graphic and easy to see which options kind of are the more preferred options to move into a short list when you look at it in that kind of format. So I think that was sort of, and anybody on the committee feels differently, but I think that's kind of where we ended up yesterday at the last meeting, is to sort of populate the matrix in a way that kind of creates that kind of visual look at what this short list would end up being. So, and looking at sort of how we would do that, I think the plan is that probably between Dora and Whittier and Compass, we would take a sort of look at it, and then we would propose to the committee, and then we would literally go through and sort of say, is that really yellow, or is it more, orange or red or whatever? So, and then as you can see here, these criteria are generally sort of broad questions that are being answered. They're not very specific at this stage. again, because we're just trying to make sure that we don't take something off the list that shouldn't be taken off, that we need further study on. So, and we mentioned, I think that, educationally anyways, the E and Butterfly are looking as the more appropriate way to look at the building configuration. But we haven't gone through this process, but that's at least at this stage, sort of the initial thinking around that. And just to remind people, the MSBA is going to require us to study that first option, the code renovation option. So that's not being studied necessarily. I can tell you, at least in our experience, that's never been chosen. I'm not sure how the MSBA would ever respond if it were chosen by a community, because it doesn't even meet the ed plan, so I'm not sure what that reaction would be. So it's just being studied because they want to be able to answer the question, or they want you to be able to answer the question of, how much would it be just if we fix this building, and be able to have that answer.
That also will be helpful later when we go to town meetings and you get people at a town meeting.
Well,
who
that's
will
what, that's
say,
what, that's,
why don't you,
right,
to be able to say, it's one or the other and it's not cheap
right,
without, so that's a valuable piece for that.
right. And like I mentioned, we're not sure the MSBA would even reimburse that option, to be honest, because it doesn't meet the ed plan. And then we also have to study an ad renovation option, whether we study the three enrollment scenarios or take a single one. But that's another requirement of the MSBA, that you study an ad reno, at least one ad reno. So we're in that's part of the debate or the deliberations that the subcommittee is going through right now. So with that, that's sort of where we stand on the evaluation subcommittee. I think, Chien, if you want to go through maybe just kind of where we're going from here, just to give people some frame of reference, and then we can kind of get some feedback from everybody about that.
Right now, that the next step that we have is that we have penciled in on January 23rd that there will be basically this presentation will be done. There will be a public presentation to introduce to show the town, and then the next subcommittee meeting is on February 6th, and by that time we anticipate to have the cost, and the cost is it's the relative cost of one project, one option versus another. That's not the absolute cost, because this is we don't have enough information. I think that's the better way to put it. So we can only say that it's more of a relative cost from one option to another. That we should be able to. We will have that information on the 6th, and then that we will work with the subcommittee to arrive at a recommended shortlist, which will be presented to the full committee on the next full committee meeting, which is February 13th. And then this is all gearing up for that by March 20th meeting that the committee need to accept and the PDP PDP to be submitted.
And just following up quickly on that, these options have now gone to the cost estimators, so it's in their hands today.
Great.
So does anyone have any questions about the process or the direction the subcommittee's going, or feedback you want to give them, or anything like that?
The short list, give just an idea, the short list will be a possibility of this consolidation, and is it 1, 2, or 3, or will it be, how narrow will that, do you expect that to be?
We've had some discussions around how much the short list would be, but it's going to touch on all the enrollment options, most likely, especially since the school committee is still discussing, that issue. In terms of how much we have to do around which, do we have to do all 3 of the ad renos? I think that's still a continuing discussion. We will definitely have to touch on all of the enrollment options in a new option. And, as was mentioned, the kind of E-Butterfly seem to be the ones that people are gravitating toward, the educators are gravitating toward. Answer your question, Charlie?
Yeah, I just, want to know what our timetables are to what level of decision and,
I think the MSBA has I forgot whether it's a 3 or 4 minimum that they require, and because there's I think there's a minimum of 3, but usually it's a 4. And because of this particular project has 3 enrollment possibilities, which then you will have to choose what else do you do you want to study once you go beyond the required minimum, and I think that's the subcommittee. And the ideally is that the narrower the short list would be, the easier it is the next step. But we may or may not. But because of the complexity of the 3 enrollment, that adds quite a bit of variations to the project.
Yeah, and I do want to mention that last night at the school committee reviewed and discussed the education plan that's driving a lot of the design essentially. And I think that we're reviewing that now, and at the next school committee meeting?
Yes,
I
so
can't remember our schedule.
We have a draft of the education plan, which actually we'll be posting online today. So everyone is welcome to take a look at that draft and
60 pages. Have fun.
and provide input. And the plan is that, having discussed it last night, the school committee at its next meeting on January 30th would be taking a vote to approve the education plan, which is part of that PDP submission. And when we talk about this evaluation criteria about how well do the buildings meet the educational needs, the education plan is what describes what those needs are. So we need to see if it's in alignment with that plan.
So just looking ahead to next steps, so we're in the option development phase right now. Like I said, the options have gone off to the cost estimators. They're going to need a couple weeks to put numbers together. We'll be continuing the options evaluations in March, shortlisting, and we'll be submitting the PDP to binder to the MSBA, leading up to this summer, where we'll have we're in the preferred solution and submission of the PSR to MSBA. And then finally, there was some discussion about the gym.
Some discussion.
So just wanted to, these are the kind of 3 examples that we've been sort of discussing. This over to the left is the standard MSBA, what they incorporate into the space summary.
That's the reimbursable space.
Yes, thank you. That's the reimbursable space for an elementary school. This here is, I think, what more closely resembles what you guys are looking at, which is a 50 by 84 main court with bleachers. Although here we're showing 7. You had talked about 4, but approximately 124 by 86, so 10,700 square feet more or less. This allows for 2 middle school size courts to go in the opposite direction. These courts that go in this direction are not the 84-foot length. They're a shorter length than this, so they're designed for middle school size. And then this one here expands the number of rows for bleacher capacity, and is a larger space. The length is the same, but the width gets a little bit wider. So
in the middle one, if you're using the cross courts, are the bleachers tucked in or are they available?
if you're using these cross courts,
Yeah.
these would be tucked into the wall.
All 7 rows.
Yep. Yep.
So I think that one way to think of it is that the middle one is that allow you to put the court in. If you want bleachers, basically we'll have to expand, you have to increase the width
Right.
on that. And whether that width is, whether the bleachers are fixed versus retractable is slightly less relevant because when you opened it up, if you want the cross court plus the bleacher, then it has to be bigger.
Right.
But if
So
you-
I
if you
think
have
we
a-
only wanted, when we're using the cross court, I think the idea was that we only needed 2 rows of bleachers. That would allow to have 2 games going on at the same time. If that, so it sounds like we want something between variation number 1 and variation number 2.
So 1 plus 2 rows of bleacher, and then that.
Right, and then,
doable.
maybe the capacity to pull out more bleachers if we need it. But,
Or if you wanted some extra space on this end or on this end, if you were to have, wanted some other bleachers on the ends.
Right, what happens here, if you want the bleachers for the cross courts, they're just at the end line?
oh, you couldn't do them on the side?
Well, it makes sense, right? If you want to see a cross-court game, you want to have some bleachers at the bottom and the top.
So it goes longer than 124, you mean, that distance?
Perhaps.
Why wouldn't you want
Right.
the, well,
Well, if you want,
oh, I see, because you're sitting along the side.
yes.
So
So
I
we,
guess, I think we were thinking that the bleachers would primarily be used for the main court,
correct.
right? So they'd run along the side.
Mhm.
And it would be nice to have them for the cross-court games, but I see the point where they would need to be in a different location.
They can certainly just be end of the court bleachers, but that's not the ideal viewing position.
Right,
for a
no, you're right.
cross-court game.
I mean, the other option is we do what we do now, which is we have chairs set up for the,
So
and we go with the variation number 1. Although I don't think we need 7. Do we need 7
No,
rows?
we talked about 4.
4. I think 4
But
rows.
why don't we look at, see what it looks like to have a couple rows, top and bottom, for
Okay.
the cross-court games
Right,
also.
right now on each of those plans, we have a 12,000 square foot placeholder.
Right.
Which is, so, if we add a couple rows here and here, it might be approaching that.
Right. I don't really want, I mean, I'm trying to think of what's the most, what satisfies our need, but at the minimum amount, right? The most fiscally
Sure.
responsible
Yeah,
size.
right, yeah, so if you think about what is primarily used for in terms of competition games.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we have enough room along the top and the bottom to set up chairs, because those cross court ones they're like 2nd, 4th grade, 5th grade,
How about we look at how much space it takes to put 2 rows of bleachers, top and bottom?
This is
Or
As
even
an alternative.
chairs,
This
yeah.
is-
Or chairs.
This is almost there because the increase is very minimum because if you have 50 plus 5 and 5 on either side, that's
Close.
60. And
This
then
is
so 2 of them, that would be 120, so you already have 4 extra feet of
Right.
wiggle room.
You
And
can't really
so-
see it that well on the screen, but you
Yeah,
can
I
see it
know.
better on the screen over there. You can
Right.
see
Oh,
the
actually,
Oh, yeah.
lighter,
Look at
Right.
that.
So you have so right now we have a little bit of
you can
wiggle
see the
room.
lighter.
So maybe we'll end up,
Not much. Yeah, it's
So
not mu-
these
not
are,
much
so
added.
here's the end
Right.
of cross court.
it's
Yeah.
a
Right.
So
minimum
maybe
amount.
if we have a little more room there.
Yeah, and
we
there's,
can set up
there's,
chairs.
Right.
there's probably more room in the middle than we need between the cross courts right
Right.
now.
Oh, right.
So
Right.
we'll do some pushing and pulling and see what we can do.
And then I think here we would just need,
That was the 4, right?
4.
yeah, just 4 rows.
So we'll plan on 4 there,
Yeah.
and the different variations
That
you
would
had,
pull out.
and then the 2 top
That
and
would
bottom.
pull out, right,
Right.
and so you couldn't, right, so 4 rows, so that would bring that in even more. So 4 rows that would pull out, and then room here to set up chairs on the top and bottom.
Or 2 rows of
Or
bleachers.
2 rows of bleachers.
And one of the options was to leave some of them permanently out, like a fixed.
Well, that's what we talked about we were only thinking of doing that when we were thinking that you'd be watching these cross-court games from the same bleachers.
Yep.
But we didn't think on the phone,
Yeah.
we weren't sort of thinking it through in terms of the angle.
Because the most efficient way would be they're either in or they're out.
So let's do 4
Yeah, all the way in or all the way out.
all the way in or all the way out.
Got it.
And as long as you can access this court with them all the way out, then we're good.
Yeah, well, they do need.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna,
That's it.
All right, I'm gonna move us along, just I'm conscious of time. I know we're a little over. We just have a couple housekeeping things that we need to do.
A question though,
Oh,
you're
yes.
asking us to fill out these sheets?
No.
No.
No, we're gonna come to you.
So this
next
is just an example of what the matrix will look like. So at the next, our next committee, we'll hand this out. What sort of, the subcommittee will have taken the first pass at filling this out. And the bulk of the meeting will be to discuss the criteria with the plans.
And I think the plan is to get that to people several days.
In advance, right, so you'll have this ahead of time. And I think this presentation is now, it's, the agenda on the website has been updated to include this presentation. So I definitely encourage you, I know a lot of information, go through these plans, you know, see what you like, what you don't like, and sort of, you know, with this criteria in mind, and kind of start thinking what your own evaluation would be, so we can have a really robust discussion next month about these. If you have any questions, clearly contact anyone. And then in terms of, okay, so I lost my agenda here. Oh, here we go. So we have a couple action items. The first is the approval of the minutes from December 20th, 2019. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. And the second is the approval of invoices. This is for the period ending December 31st, 2019. And these are, we've got 3 invoices. One for Compass for $18,670. One from Doran Whittier for $45,930. And one from Westwood Media Center for $500. So the total amount of invoices is $65,100. Can I get a motion to approve these 3 invoices for a total of $65,100?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, and I think I just need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Thank you guys very much. Sorry we went a little over.
Thanks.